Welcome everyone to the 2020 Harvest Wrap. Thank you so much for joining us today. InnoVint's proud to round out the year hosting our third virtual event. Our goal as the convener is to share valuable and relevant information to benefit the winemaking community. Today, we're trying out a new format where we're featuring 7 different presenters in a 1-hour time slot who will each have a few minutes to share their technical insights or their experience with this past vintage. Let's meet the moderators. So I'm Ashley Leonard. I am the CEO and founder of InnoVint, and I'm joined today by Dawn Laborde, who is InnoVint's Client Success Director. We'll be tag teaming the moderation today as we walk through the content with each of our presenters. Okay, so let's go through the agenda. What we'll cover today, we'll start with the 2020 yields and harvest trends that we're seeing across the West Coast, and Dawn will be presenting some InnoVint data. Then we will feature Eric Hervé, who is an R&D scientist with ETS Labs, and he will cover some information on the smoke-affected wines this year. Then we will transition to the WineXRay team, Scott McLeod and Gianni Colantwani, who will be presenting phenolic data and insights from them. And then we'll change gears a bit and we will feature some end users, 2 winemakers and InnoVint clients, Kevin White, the owner and winemaker of Kevin White Winery, who is located in Woodinville, Washington, and he sources and specializes in cool climate Rhones from the Yakima Valley. And then we will finish out with Ronald Dupree, the GM partner at Sugarloaf Crush. They're in Sonoma Valley, and he has some pretty crazy stories about what he had to tackle this year during harvest. So for those of you that may not know much about InnoVint, we're a software company. And we're not just any software company, but we're one that has an internal team of winemakers that have over 100 harvests under our belt. We get winemaking and we get how winery software needs to be accessible to winemakers and their teams, to viticulture teams, and to other departments and parties as well, like finance, compliance, really anyone that feeds into the ecosystem of making wine. We sum up the value that we provide our clients in 3 ways. The first way is we help you buy back time. So if you're still wrangling spreadsheets and sifting through paper, there's a better solution for you. 2, increase profitability. So we help you understand how much it costs to make each of your wines and ultimately helps you manage your expenses and improve your margins. And then 3rd, make better wine. Winemaking is a data-driven art form. The more you know, the better decisions you can make to craft your wines and sustain or even improve quality. So on that note, an essential component of quality winemaking is measuring and understanding analytical data. The partners that we're featuring today, WineXRay and ETS Labs, would definitely agree with that. And this is why InnoVint feels a sense of responsibility to bring these thought leaders to you so they can educate you on the most timely and relevant information. So with that, this is where I hand off to Dawn, who has some slides to run through.
So, just an intro from me. As Ashley said, my name is Dawn Laborde. I am the Client Success Director here at InnoVint. And my role is basically client support, project manager, and winemaking advisor for our larger sort of premium clients. And I'm here just to help our clients do whatever they need to do, whether it is kind of change some of the in-house procedures to match the tech and make it more efficient, or help change the tech a little bit to match the internal structure. With the amount of fires and smoke that we saw this year, there was quite a few tons left on the vine. And we have a bit of data that we were able to pull from our system that shows Chardonnay, Pinots, and Bordeaux varietals, and it shows how drastic the lack of picking or the harvest fell off after those fires. Okay, so a little self-deprecation right here. We know for those that don't make wine in California or Napa, you have to see a lot of Napa data, and this is probably not much different. We most of our data points do come from Napa, so but we do have a little bit of info from Willamette and Walla Walla, so we will try to have a fairly well-rounded representation here. But this slide here, it represents all varieties in Napa Valley, and you can see there's a couple huge spikes in 2020. This is 2020 versus 2019. A couple big picking spikes in 2020 earlier than normal, and my assumption is that it's trying to get things off the vine after the first fire. But then when the glass fire hits, you really see a drastic drop off in 2020 compared to 2019, just leaving a lot of tons on vine. And here, in Sonoma and Mendocino, you see the same trend. It's not quite as drastic. You can see in September, it's a little bit of an early harvest in 2020 compared to 2019. There are similar spikes with certain varieties coming in. But again, after the glass fire, you see another drop off, a fairly drastic drop off. It's not as bad as we saw in Napa, but it's still impactful for sure. Willamette Valley. So this is all tons or all varieties across the Willamette Valley. And in 2019, the blue, you can really see that Pinot harvest. That first spike is what I expect to be the Pinot harvest, followed by the Chardonnay harvest right thereafter. And we had the early fires in Oregon this year, and where that Pinot spike was in 2019, you just don't have that spike in 2020. And you see a little bit of a recovery afterwards, but just not nearly the amount of tons coming in as what you would see in 2019 or a normal year. And here again in Walla Walla, 2019, the blue graph, my assumption, again, this is all tons. So, being fairly heavy with Merlot, Syrah, and Cabernet in Washington, you see those three distinctive spikes in picks. And again, in 2020, you just don't see that. The fires hit pretty early in the season up there, and it obviously drastically reduced the amount of tons coming in across all varieties. And here's for Bordeaux. So this is Bordeaux varietals across all regions that are represented in InnoVint. And again, same trend. I mean, this is it's incredible. It's a little sad, and you can really see how drastically different of a year 2020 compared to 2019 was because of these fires. Okay, Chardonnay. So Eric Hervé with ETS is going to have some interesting things to say about Chardonnay as it pertains to smoke-affected wines. But again, you can see, just like with the reds, there is a fairly drastic drop-off right at that September-October cusp, right after the glass fire. So a drastic decrease in Chardonnay picking as well. And then finally, this is Pinot Noir across all regions, and same trend. Quite a few spikes in 2019 as far as high picking trends in 2019, and you can see the same spikes. I mean, the harvests are there. It's just at a much lower quantity. So you can definitely see across this year on the West Coast, across all varieties, all regions, these fires really made a huge impact on our industry. And I think this leads perfectly into Eric coming on and talking a little bit about what ETS saw when it came to smoke-affected wines this year. Eric?
So yes, for us, obviously, the defining event this year was the fires after COVID, on the fact that we were overrun, clearly, with samples. That was despite additional staff, additional instruments. I mean, at some point we had 16 GCMS on triple quads running just for smoke markers tests. But well, after 2017, we thought that we would be prepared, and but it was 2020. So right after, during the LNU fire, we saw a tidal wave of grape samples, not only because of the severity of the event, but also because insurance companies wanted results, wanted numbers to trigger reimbursements. A lot of people after that switched actually to microferments. So we started to get a lot of microferments. So we just got swamped with samples. We rented on both fridges and freezers. If you came to ETS at that point, they were just everywhere in the hallways. And then the glass fire happened. And with the glass fire, well, we evacuated the lab on September 30th. And we realized, but gosh, we have thousands and thousands of berry samples in our freezers and fridges that we need to save. And we decided to put all the fridges on trucks and move them to a secure location in the middle of the night while the fires were raging on the hills around us. So that was our story. So this table here is what I say normally regarding pre-harvest tests for grapes or microferments. There's pros and cons. Big advantage of grape tests is that they are quick normally. Disadvantage is that you have indirect results. There's always a multiplier between grape results and what you can expect in wine, and we don't always know exactly what it's going to be. We never know exactly what it's going to be. With microferments, we have a more accurate predicting tool, but with a delayed answer because it takes about a week to get samples. Also, insurance companies were using grape results. Yeah, and this year, several things happened. So first, about the microferments, you can taste them. And they're normally interesting to assess the risk of smoke taint showing up in production wines. But here, in that case, how do you do tastings when the smoke odor, where the smoke and the smoke odor is absolutely everywhere? About your results, well, the wait time was way too long for any decision before harvest. It was still fine for insurance companies. And by the way, after a recommendation from UC Davis, most insurance companies started to accept microferment results. That's basically all the volatile markers that we can measure in grapes and in wines. This year, clearly, we had to focus on the two main markers, guaiacol for methyl guaiacol, but even with focusing on that, we was past our capacity. So there's a need for faster screening options for grapes. We are working on that, but it's not easier said than done. And there's maybe a need for microfermentation facilities. I mean, a lot of growers were calling us saying, okay, we want to do microferments, but how do we do that? And where do we do that? Do you do it? No, we couldn't. So maybe they need to band together and get a facility that is ready to prepare microferments in case of catastrophic fire events like what we had. So, we are back offering volatile markers, an extended panel for volatile markers in wines, not yet for glycosylated forms, and it didn't only depend on us. In the meantime, we were having, so we banded together actually with the AWRI and some labs, some from big wineries, to have all these compounds that you see on the right of your screen, the glycosylated markers, because these pure compounds didn't exist. So AWI was measuring them, but expressing them as something else. The same for us. And basically we decided, okay, let's wait until we have these compounds and everybody will be on the same page. And that's going to be a quantum leap. On the next slide is the geeky stuff, if you want. And that's what it is here, is something that nobody has seen. It's only 2 days old. Nobody has seen that before. That's chromatographic peaks by HPLC MSMS of the 6 main glycosylated markers on their isotopic analogs that we will use as internal standards. And again, that's a very big deal here. First time that this is done. And as I said, in January also, you can submit samples for glycosylated markers at ETS. Okay. So to conclude, that wasn't a year where we could learn a lot from the scientific standpoint. There's just a few observations. Basically, again, Petit Verdot was extremely impacted compared to other varieties. And the good surprise was that Chardonnay was not. Basically, you needed pretty impacted, relatively severe smoke impact, as you could see from Pinot Noir, from Chardonnay to start showing the smoke markers and for wines to be impacted. And that will be my conclusion. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Eric. With that, we'll move into Phenolic Trends of the Year with the WineXRay team, Scott McLeod and Gianni Colantwani. Scott?
Hey, Don, thank you. And thanks for InnoVint for having us. The thing that we really take away from this vintage, besides the fires, and that's obviously the marker that's going to be on everyone, it's when you have an exciting harvest and you have people enthusiastic about the potential fruit quality and the potential wine quality, we see a vast number of samples increase as people have more interest in their lots. This year, we probably saw the fewest amount of lots run by wineries and the fewest amount of samples per lot. And it just reflects a general malaise about what the potential quality of the harvest was. It's really quite depressing to see all these really wonderful clients with beautiful fruit and basically understanding the realization that they did not have the quality that they had expected. Obviously, fire related. The first slide represents one thing that we recognize is how warm it was in 2020. We had a total of 11 days, and this is core Napa Valley, Oakville, Rutherford, from the field station. We had 11 days over 100 degrees. That sounds like a lot, but we go back to 2017, we actually had 19, and we had relatively modest vintages of 2018 and 2019. And what this tells us is that obviously if you look at the fires of 17 and 20 in Napa Valley and Sonoma, obviously, and before that in Lake County, you realize that there's a direct correlation here between these massive fires and the amount of heat we have generating over these heat spikes over 100 degrees. So I think this is going forward whenever we see these kinds of early seasons of hot. Notice in 2020, this year, we had one day over 100 in May, had a day over 100 in October. These are very long, warm seasons. And when they do have these kind of seasons, we're going to get fire. So the first slide, this is a typical winery extraction. Basically what we look at from a winery perspective, we're looking at our juice samples, and this is where we sort of diverge with the current thinking. Normally we're tracking in the violet line there, you have your Brix increase over time, a decrease in your TA and an increase in your pH. What Gianni's going to talk about is basically what's really, really important when we look at berry quality and the resultant wine quality, and that is looking at everything on a per berry basis. Gianni, I'll turn it over to you.
So what this is representing is the typical profiles that we can attract during a season, especially during veraison. This particular graph here was done in 2014. Essentially what we do is we track the change of color. The minute we see about 5% of extra change in color, then a week to 10 days after that, we actually start weekly sampling and analysis. These are very, very typical primary chemistry or juice chemistry type of measurements. The top line is the Brix, and as you can see, it is monotonically increasing. The middle line is the TA, and the bottom line is the pH. So essentially, this is a way that we have been normally tracking the maturity of the berries during the veraison season. What we have to do is, yes, we have to continue taking those measurements, but we have to translate these measurements into on a per berry basis. So we have done that, and these are the results. The middle red line indicates the berry size or fresh berry weight. The bottom line indicates the berry sugar loading, so that is the accumulation of sugars on a per berry basis. And then the top line indicates the level of extractable anthocyanins that we can expect from those berries. And the interesting thing about these three measurements is that they all have the shape of an umbrella. That is, they accumulate, the level off a bit, and then if depending on all sorts of conditions, they actually can start decreasing as well. So here's where we're making the shift between measuring the juice properties of bricks, pH, and TA into measuring something more about the berries themselves, the fruit, based on its weight, the sugar loading, and then the amount of color that we can actually extract from those berries. So we did this in 2014. Now I have some examples of what we observed in 2020. If I can go to the next slide. So this is this particular year in 2020. In this particular block, which is in the core of Napa, that is the Rutherford, Oakville area, we looked at one block and we wanted to do a trial on it. One was a control, and we wanted to make the decisions the way where we normally were making decisions in the past. But then we wanted to use this concept here of the berry weight and extractable anthocyanins to make the decision on when to harvest. So the start of variation took place on the 29th of July, which is actually not that far different from other years. And notice that right after that, in August 17, we had the LNU fire. And then towards later on, we had the glass fire in the 27th of November. The only thing that we really need to take a look at here is this information. We do take these measurements, and the information gives us an indication of what is the Brix level, what is the pH level, and what is the TA level. And then, of course, we can switch that. So what we're seeing here is the actual real-time tracking of the berry weight, and notice that we are this is pretty good. We're this is Cabernet Sauvignon, so we're talking about a berry weight of 1 gram per berry, and notice that it's pretty flat and pretty sustainable here. So we're doing a good job of making sure that we don't overstress the vines, and that's in the middle. Then at the bottom, we're looking at the berry sugar loading, and I think, and you can take my word for it. If you expand this graph, you will see that the umbrella shape there. And then, of course, on the top here, we're seeing that the extractable anthocyanins are increasing, and then they're almost flattening it out, and then they will start going down. So essentially what we did here, we say, okay, well, the way that we're going to make the decision is to keep in mind the Brix, the pH, and the TA, make sure that we have a good level of size of the berries, make sure that we are already at the level where the berries are not accumulating any more colors, and then at that point, we can actually look at the harvesting. And that's what we did. We actually harvested the trial part of this with a fresh berry weight of about 1. And the extractable level of anthocyanins about 1650. And just to give everybody a sense of the scale here, we have a scale that it can go as high as 3,000 parts per million of extractable color in Napa. Depending on the different region and depending on the growing conditions, of course, the band is usually from 1,000 parts per million to 2,000 or a little bit more than that. So we made the decision on September 24th, based on not only the Brix, the pH, and TA considerations, but more specifically about the fact that we had a good berry size. We had good sugar. We reached the peak of sugar loading, and then we were at a point where we could actually pull the trigger and decide on that. On the trial side, we were able to actually make the wine, and the wine is going through malolactic right now. But if you notice, right after we actually harvested. The glass fires showed up, and of course, I guess you've heard quite a bit about what the consequences of that. So we did not have a line for the control part of this experiment to actually track. This is a separate location, still in the Rutherford, Oakville, Youngville area. And in this particular case, we have data for 3 years, 2018, 2019, and 2020. And very briefly, what I wanted to point out here is notice the variability in the size of the berries. Now, if we look at the profiles of the extractable anthocyanins, we see that there is quite a bit of a distinction between what happened in 2018, not only in the shape of the curve, but also the timing of the curve. And let me point out that that star there means that in 2020, we were able to start this process at the beginning of the start of variation. And in 2018 and 2019, we started in the middle of the season. Either way, we can see that 2018 had a pretty good level of color. And when we came close to harvesting, the decrease wasn't that significant. And we had quite a high level of extractable anthocyanins. So this was crushed in October 11th, and almost the 2000 level of parts per million of extractable color. And the other side, we have 2019, where we actually had an extractable level of extractable anthocyanins of about 1300. And in 2020, we started early, we started increasing, but of course, the environmental conditions were such that they dropped us down to at about a 1750 level on that.
That, Johnny, realize that when you look at single block information over multiple years, what really strikes you after we do hundreds of these is that though you might be thinking you're farming identically as the year before, you might think that you have the season under control. Mother Nature can give you as much as a 50% change in your phenolic extraction as well as your phenolic content. And the two things to always keep in mind is that we're going to see variability in the amount of anthocyanins produced in a given year, and that's going to be degraded by temperatures exceeding 100 Fahrenheit. So we have both in the warmer locations a decline in the actual accumulation and then an increase in the degradation of the anthocyanin. And what we found in Napa Valley the last couple of years, as hot as they've been, we've actually been able to accumulate a large amount of anthocyanin that remained extractable into the finished wine. It really comes to increased management in the care of direct sun contact in the afternoon side by the use of shade cloth. And I'd say the one thing I've seen in Napa Valley that I did not see 10 years ago was virtually the use of shade cloth from generally Oakville north to Calistoga. And these are vineyards that never had shade cloth prior to this. So we are adapting to a warming climate. We are adapting to direct sun exposure, and we realize that it's also something that is degrading our potential quality.
It's the last observation that we like to make is that even if you look at an individual block, there can be significant variability within the block. So this was a separate vineyard, and we were able to, over the period of 2 or 3 years, not only observe that yes, we do have different levels of vigor, and they behave differently. And this is to show that we started working on that particular vineyard. And in 2019, as far as the berry size is concerned, we had a pretty significant difference from one level of vigor to another level of vigor. But at the end, it was about 1 gram per berry. In 2020, you see that the berry size now is a 0.75, but the variability is actually closer. And if you can go to the next slide, then you'll see what actually the environmental conditions in the season can do. In 2019, of course, we saw the separation between one vigor level and the other. And in 2020, we actually thought that we had done a very good job of uniformity in the block. And we were getting a pretty good increase in the level of extractable anthocyanins. However, the environmental conditions changed, the soil conditions changed, and the viticultural part also changed, and we saw a decrease of over 40% within a period of a week before those berries could actually be, or the fruit could actually be harvested.
John. Hang on, John. Let me just add to that. So what this shows is that we spent the entire season accumulating high amounts of anthocyanin, and we lost a significant amount of that with a very late heat spike. So the heat spikes and timing of the heat spike has tremendous effects on final wine quality. And the question, of course, everyone in the valley, everywhere, anywhere at a warm location from Walla Walla all the way to Paso Robles, is if you're on 25, 26 bricks, you have good flavors, and you're waiting and you're going to go through a heat spike, think twice, because the heat spike is going to lose both quality in terms of your available anthocyanin. It's going to degrade it. Berry weight is going to decline sharply, as well as a change in flavors, which we won't talk about. But what we always see with our clients in Europe is, for them, it's about reaching the maximum anthocyanin, knowing that you reach phenological maturity. Of course, you don't know you reach your peak till you're past the peak. So once they're on the downslope of the anthocyanin curve, they realize that, okay, the berry's done everything it possibly can. It's up to us to harvest the fruit. And if nature is going to throw a curveball, whether it's rain or a heat spike, think twice and maybe get your fruit in. That's really the takeaway.
Yep. So in conclusion then, essentially, everything is local. We can do this in real time. And the cumulative effects during the season are always showing up in the berries, and therefore we focus on the berries' properties and the berry quality. And then at the end, if you focus on during the season, making sure you get the right level of size of the berries, and then you see the point where the sugar loading is essentially plateaued out right there, then think in terms of the style of wine, or the type of wine that you want to make, and where you can make the decision based on the extractable anthocyanins curve.
Thank you so much to both of you and to Eric. Really appreciate it. What a unprecedented and fascinating harvest it's been. All right, we have a couple questions coming in. Again, feel free to ask and we'll answer them at the end of the session. We're going to pivot now to talk to some winemakers. So we're going to start with Kevin White. And again, if you weren't here in the beginning, Kevin White is the owner winemaker of Kevin White Winery that is in Woodinville, Washington, and he sources fruit from the Yakima Valley. Take it away, Kevin.
Thanks, Ashley, Dawn, and the InnoVint team. It's great to be here, and thank you so much for organizing this. I think it's a really valuable tool for all of us to collaborate, learn from each other, especially in a year like 2020. Like Ashley said, I'm a boutique winery winemaker, and I am in Woodinville, Washington, but all the fruit that we work with is from the Yakima Valley in central Washington state, for those who are not familiar. And although we did not have the glass fire, which was just devastating for the community as a whole, we did have a very unique and challenging vintage ourselves, and some of it was related to the fire. So I thought I would spend a few minutes just providing my perspective on the reflections in the vineyard and in the cellar. And for those winemakers or wineries that are smaller and have questions, would love to engage in the Q&A at the end. But just to give a little context on the vintage, from my perspective, there's a lot that you can talk about, but there's 5 key points that I think come to mind as I'll be evaluating the wines for quality over time. And the first one was 2019. And when you saw that chart on tons that Dawn referenced earlier on in Walla Walla, and there was those spikes in 2019 and the drops in 2020 because of smoke, those spikes were correlated to our freeze events, especially in October. In early to mid-October, we had multiple frosts. which affected the 2019 vintage, and the fact that we had to pick when your canopies fall apart, you have to pick. But we did see bud damage and we did see bark damage on the vines, and as many of you know, that will follow through to the following vintage. And so that was the beginning, in my mind, to the 2020 vintage. And when you look at where we ended up with very small berry sizes, and we had yields down 20 to 50% across the state. On average, from what we're seeing from the Wine Commission, we're at 20% down, but I've seen vineyards that were 50% down. And a lot of that has to do with how the vintage progressed. One of the key elements was the wind. And we always have wind. We're lucky that our mildew levels are generally pretty low because of the wind. But we had extreme wind this year. It was constant wind. And really, when you look at the effect on the vines, we had smaller canopy sizes. During set, we had a lot of wind, which provided for more shatter. The fruit, the clusters were very loose. And it was really just a constant stress on the vines like I haven't seen in the last 10 years. Thicker skins, smaller berries are what you want to be thinking about here. Over Labor Day, we had historic windstorms, 40 to 50 mile per hour sustained winds for hours, which ended up causing a lot of damage in the field, and there was a lot of field declassification when we were picking. That type of wind will damage your berries, and when you catch it, at that point you can drop, but when you're actually picking, you'll start finding bunch rot from where the skins were punctured. And there was stem damage, which effectively stopped the ripening of those clusters. And so wind was a huge factor. And in addition, our moisture levels were extremely low this year. We didn't have a deep snowpack. And because of the wind, if you weren't watering and you weren't keeping a good hydration program on your vines, you could very easily find yourself in an overly stressed situation. And so that was, I think a lot of the factors that really drove us into this situation of really small berry sizes and really low yields. And then we had smoke. It was around the first week of September when the smoke started rolling in from the glass fire and from the fires in the Oregon Valley, the Willamette Valley. And that, for all intents and purposes, stopped ripening for about a week. In most of Washington, we were covered in a complete state of smoke, and photosynthesis effectively stopped. And you think about this first week of September, and your bricks are jumping by 0.1 or 0.05. That's abnormal. And so we had a little bit of a break where what we picked before was going through, and there was a lot of cases where the cellars were starting to clear out, and then we had the post-smoke harvest. So I was liking to think about it, and evaluations are still underway on the extent of the smoke damage. So hopefully it will not be as extreme as it could be. So that's my perspective on the vineyards in a nutshell. And what you're looking at here, the picture, this is Weather Eye Vineyard, which is on the top of Red Mountain, kind of an extreme site that was planted that we're very lucky to work with. It's just a little perspective of what we were doing in the cellar this year. We're a boutique winery, and we are scaling up. And really, at this point, our goal is to increase quality 1% each vintage. We've got to a point where we're pretty happy with our overall portfolio program, and now we're just looking at the tools to grow 1% every year. And one of the great things that we discovered with InnoVint was this is helping us take that next step. For those of you who have been in this situation of Excel hell, where we're keeping track of all of our barrels and what we're doing and lab results in Excel, it just becomes unmanageable to really kind of to take it to the next level. And so we're really excited to find the tool and other tools also. And really, that's kind of a key takeaway that I have found in the last year and a half is once you get to this inflection point, it's really important to invest in the tooling to really help you scale to drive that quality. Because it's all about the little things, as many of us know. So that's a big takeaway that we had, and we really saw that coming together this year to be more effective and productive in the winery. Another thing that we did is we invested in a bunch of concrete tanks, and you can see our harvest intern here, Kevin Merritt, who was doing some punch downs here on one of our concrete tanks, which is probably a Syrah Grenache. And we're really excited about that. And for being the size and the scale of where we're at, it's all about taking that next step. And it was really exciting and fun to learn and leverage the quality of the wines that are coming out of this, which is absolutely fantastic. And so some of you have probably been using these for years, but it's just amazing. And then the last thing the last two things I'll part on is, our perspective is really to focus on mouthfeel and texture starting at crush. And, we really kind of work that into our program, and every single year we're doing more on, how are we thinking about air? How are we doing leaf stirring early on? And how are we, thinking through the different processes and the little things that we can do to end up with a product 18, 20 months down the road that's really going to have that what I think is a key differentiator between good wine and great wine to most consumers is mouthfeel and texture. And lastly, because we've had that small berry size because of the vineyard events, I guess this will tell the test of time on, does smaller berries really equal more concentrated wine? And so we're really excited to follow and learn about these wines. It's definitely specific to this vintage. Anyway, so that's a little bit of my perspective of the vintage and what we did here at Kevin White Winery in 2020. And happy to take any questions towards the end. And again, thank you to the team at InnoVint for organizing this.
Kevin, for sharing your experience. There's multiple Northwest and Washington wine growers attending, so I'm sure they found that of value. And for what it's worth, I attended an Oregon Tech wine growing harvest recap yesterday, and they had a lot of the same sentiment to say about kind of one of the worst years for Shattered they've seen in 15 years, and the same low yields. All right, let's transition over to Ronald. Ronald, welcome. And again, if you weren't here in the beginning, Ronald is the GM and partner for Sugarloaf Crush in Sonoma Valley. So take it away, Ronald.
Thank you for the introduction, Ashley, and thank you for my fellow presenters for all the great information shared. The two biggest takeaways that we definitely took away from this fire event, and you would figure since our first fire event was 2017 when wineries were essentially locked out in Napa and Sonoma County, is that the first is that we still don't have don't have a mechanism in place when massive events like this happen, where lockouts, when roads are closed and these lockouts of the facilities, that staff and personnel can get in literally within 24 hours. And the second one is how to manage fermentations after a massive event like this, because the smoke doesn't clear out right away, and it comes back. Plus, you have 15 plus days of fermentation management you got to do with fermenters that potentially could get reduced. So with the glass fire event, it was an interesting event. I do want to preface in saying that with my next slide, you will see there was a video that was taken at 3 a.m. in the morning on Monday the 29th, and I do want to preface in saying that I do have wildland fire experience. I was a firefighter for 7 years with Geyserville, which is now Northern Sonoma County Fire, and have been on massive campaign fires. I've been in structure fires, so I do know what I'm doing, and that's one of the reasons that I did what I did during this event. And so thank you, and Michelle, if you could play this quick video. So this video was filmed from the back of the winery, and I apologize. It's shot with an iPhone, and as you can see, some of those flames, those trees are 30 feet high, and you can see it's just a massive fire that burned our entire hillside. Now, at this time already, our hillside completely burned through. I was pretty busy at that time, so shooting video at that time was not my highest priority. That night, I came to the winery around 10 o'clock at night, packed my bags, and as everybody's leaving, I'm driving in. Obviously, not the first time in my life I did that. I was by myself. Again, like I said, I do have experience in fighting fire, so I was very comfortable in doing what I was doing. Plus, you know, it's a winery. We have the sound was muted on this video because our generators in the background, and it was extremely loud. You know, and there's two massive tanks. If you go to the next slide, you'll see there are two massive tanks. One is a 80,000 gallon firefighting tank. The second one is our domestic water tank. And so I was trying to shoot the video from kind of the same area where I were, you know, about 12 hours before. This video was shot around 3 p.m. in the afternoon. It was extremely long, very, very long, long 30 hours for me. And as you can see, our entire hillside burned. It was, and the speed that this fire was moving was actually, it was unbelievable. I've been on some big fires in my life, and literally when that hillside behind us burned, was around, I would say probably around 2:15 a.m. It came through there at an astronomical speed. I really just observed that at that time. I wasn't really gonna focus my energy on putting grass out. Because we do have a propane tank in the background there, and so I did stop the fire there, and then I had to refocus my energy on another spot on the other side. Again, like I said, you know, I was at the building. You know, I was asked by the sheriffs to leave, and I did not. And you know, I'm not the only one who's telling these types of stories. The other reason I was there too was I knew if I kept the generator on, get that going, you know, the building essentially will protect itself. It is a Class 5 fire construction building, so it's completely metal roof, metal siding. But you know, obviously, as you can see, there are, you know, when Michelle panned on the video, there are some macro bins alongside that. Macro bins with enough heat will burn. So so there was one spot where I really had to stand my ground and make sure that the fire didn't burn down. I did put out 2 structures on my neighbor's property, which is NovaVine as well. Part of it was also, again, I do know what I was doing at that time, what I'm doing, and I knew if those 2 structures caught fire, it would spread and potentially endanger our building. And then, you know, my little joke I can tell now is that my self-serving was we do get our internet from it's routed through their office, and I made sure their office didn't burn because I wanted to make sure we'd be able to operate. And since InnoVint is internet-based, we couldn't lose our internet connection, even though we have backup hotspots. But they, you know, a couple cell towers went out, and it ended up being spotty. So, so next slide. That's kind of my firefighting story. As you can see, that's how the fire burned. It did burn on the front of the building. I don't really care that much about the landscape. And I do want to say I had 2 escape routes pre-planned. The winery, the first one was obviously leaving in a certain direction. There was some fire equipment stationed in Oakmont. And my second, and I excuse my language, oh shit moment would be, we have a 1 million gallon waste treatment pond. I unlocked the gate. I knew I had a clear path to run in the event the building would go up, and I would have jumped in the pond. I had a ladder set up to get out of the pond. So luckily I didn't have to do that. So next slide. So how did we have to manage fermentations post the fire event? Now, we actually did employ this setup in 2017, and actually in 2018 was when the Paradise Fire, and we got socked in for about a week and a half because Sonoma Valley is a pretty narrow valley, and we got socked in with a lot of smoke. We had to close fermenters. A lot of fermenters were in mid fermentation because we get a lot of Napa cab, and a lot of the Napa cab showed up in the late October. So, meaning most of them post cold soak were literally in the mid, between 18 and 12 degrees Brix, with extremely smoky air environment. So we did seal up tanks. We repurposed some Venturis. I bought a couple more Venturis and then hooked it up to oxygen tank. We standardized this by, and it is, I do want to say it's medical grade oxygen because or food grade oxygen because we wanted to make sure it's very, very clean. And so we did standardize by getting a regulator that it was pretty sensitive in measuring the amount of oxygen pushed into the gas lines, and we set that at 2 liters per minute. That way we could standardize our flow rate essentially to trying to get it to say, we breathe about 20% oxygen, and I do want to say all of this there's no science behind this. We haven't done any experimentation. This is pure anecdotal. Like in the moment, we got to figure something out, and so we just standardized the flow rate at 2 liters per minute, and then calculated out roughly in a 40 to 20 minute pump over, like, okay, at this regular flow rate of a pump, how much oxygen is being taken in. However, I do want to say a Venturi injects oxygen. It's not a passive system like a bucket underneath the sump. So we did have to cut down our pump over times a little bit, especially when you got into the 5 and below degrees Brix rates. When CO2 production is obviously slowing down. So a lot of the pump overs and the oxygen Venturis was done by clients tasting their wines, our own wines that we managed, also tasting them. We're like, okay, it needs a little bit more air. So there was a lot of interaction with clients in this system. Sugarloaf has large and small fermenters. This particular hookup that's here was on a smaller fermenter, and we actually just in this case just bubbled it through the fermenter. Next slide. And in this year, we have one of our leasing clients of pump tanks, and we set up a system with the auto pump over tank, and as you can see, there's the oxygen dewar. This was not an automated system, so we still, even though the auto pump over tank would kick on, we did have to manually open the valve because otherwise the system is open, and we future probably a valve pump kicks on. There would be a few second delay, and then the valve would open on the oxygen tank. So then the tank would automatically start inducing oxygen into the system. So we just to be very, very clear, this had to be manually done because otherwise the oxygen would just keep on delivering oxygen through the Venturi and up the standpipe to the top of the tank. And like I said, run your math, make sure your oxygen delivery rates, if you do set up a system like that your oxygen delivery rates, excuse me, I just lost my voice, is that consistent, apply to pump speed is consistent. So then you can mimic close to basically what a bucket and sump aeration would be. So we've expanded the system. We all know fires are not going to go away; they're probably going to get worse. So for the future, we are definitely setting up more of these systems. Renting a dewar, is a good insurance policy for us. We learned we've basically had this dewar. We got one 2017, had one 2018, 2019, and obviously 2020. And it's the system works. The systems work very, very well. We had very very little reduction in our fermentations with the system. We didn't have any wines that were aldehydic or over oxygenated. Like I said, it is something that you want to work for us in our custom crush environment. We work very closely with our clients in setting this up with a couple standards of pump speed, delivery rate of the oxygen, and making sure that your plumbing and your supply lines are the same. And yeah, thank you so much, and for InnoVint for hosting this webinar.
We do have a few questions. I know we've passed the hour mark, but I think that's okay. People can choose to stick with us or go out for lunch, whatever they want to do. But we do have a couple questions. Ronald, since we have you here, we got a question asking if you think that it's time for winemakers to start getting some fire training for some of these seasons.
I think it's a good idea, especially if you are in a winery that has wildland around it. I'm South African, and I was there is so I can remember being in South Africa, and staff running out with burlap sacks and buckets of water and beating fire down. So it's a little different than the US. But yeah, I do think that I think it's a good skill to have. We have a couple systems here at the winery. We have some wildland fire gear here, hose lines that we can set up that we can run directly off our fire pumps. So those things made a big difference for me. Winery hoses. We have hoses every 25 feet, delivering 25 gallons plus per minute. So, most buildings are pretty primed to be able to fight a fire really well if you can do it. And the key thing I think that fire training will give you is to know knowing your limitations and when to get out and making sure you've got good. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I had a similar experience in 2017, having to sneak beyond police lines and at least, see if I can get the wines pumped over once a day or so. But, I have no fire experience, so I wasn't going to stick around and try to fight a fire. But
I do want to say as an industry, we should, I've been in talks with our local county supervisor, Susan Gorin, and then as well as the agriculture commissioner here in Sonoma County. That we have to, as an industry, we really need to push, because it's been 4 years now, essentially, and we still don't have really any, the Ag Commissioner was a lot faster in getting permits out this year, but there was still a 3-day lag phase, and we all know that unmanaged fermentations in 3 days they're going to be dry, and we as an industry have to make our voices heard in that if it's safe enough, we have to be able to have permits to be able to access our facilities, because we have millions of dollars on the line in many people's livelihoods, and just to be blanketed by some authority that's not even out of county, just say no, you can't go in. They're just following orders. They're doing their jobs, but we have to have our elected officials hear us and be able to give us the necessary tools and authority to access our facilities if they're safe enough to be able to protect our product.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Ronald, just out of curiosity, your smoke season, it's not pulse air, your oxygen cap management system. Are you willing to share that procedure with others if needed?
Yeah, it's like I said, it's pretty rudimentary math, and it's kind of like what your flow rate is, and then it's literally it's pretty much trial by fire. You can we did some math, like I said, we set hours at 2 liters per minute. Some days will fluctuate up to 4, but we have a pretty good regulator now, so it's very consistent at 2 liters per minute through a 3/8 inch line. 3/8, and so again, it depends on your Venturi system that you have, and let's just do the math. If your pump's pumping at 30 or 60, you have to have a minimum flow rate for the Venturi to work. But if your pump is pumping at 30 gallons per minute, do the math. It's X amount of time, and you know, it's like I said, we just based it on 2 liters per minute, because 100 2 liters out of it's 20% on 10 liters. So you know, so we just ran it. We kind of ran the math that way. So to try to get it as much as possible to essentially the oxygen that we breathe, which is around 21%.
Yeah, nice. Okay, great. We had a question come in for Eric earlier. Eric, if you're still on, is there a plan? I mean, I know it's tough to predict the big fire years, but is there a plan to expand smoke testing somewhat to keep from getting overrun again, like a year like this? I mean, I know this is an unprecedented year, but what's your plan for the future?
That's yes. But do you hear me fine? Yes.
What's
yes,
that? Yeah.
Do you hear me? Yes. Okay. Yes. But I mean, we just filled any bench space that we could have with GCMS. Yes, as I said, there were more than 16 GCMS or triple quads running at the time, so we're really at maximum capacity. I mean, besides getting another lab and having millions of dollars of instruments sitting up for all year doing nothing, and being ready for harvest when smoke fires happen, I don't see how we can handle that. I'm thinking about other tests for grapes, at least a quick screening tool that would give you an idea, okay, is my risk low, medium, high? But something that would take just a few minutes, and it's not completely impossible. We are looking at several possibilities. It would be completely different instrumentation, but it's we're looking into that. The other thing also was just with microferments. Also, yes, we got so many phone calls of growers asking, okay, how can I do microferments? Who can do that? And I hear that in Australia, people would get together, and the wineries would open their doors and have basically microferment facilities open to the growers, and that's something to think about.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And Marion asked here, do you think we have a clear picture of smoke damage yet this year, or are we still under evaluation?
No, from us, it will be difficult anyways, because what we get is skewed sampling of what is in reality. Obviously, we are getting mostly samples from exposed to smoke. Still, before the glass fire, still the majority of the grape samples we're getting at ETS turned out to be negative. Okay, so that's a good news. So what we can assume is that as long as you were not too close to the fires and at low elevation, it seemed to be fine. Then after glass fire, yes. Anyways, Napa Valley, at least not much fruit was harvested anyways.
Yeah. And I know you guys were working on getting baseline analysis for all varieties in non-smoke years. Are you still working on that project? And what's the deal there?
Yes, and that was in wines mostly, and with for the glycosylated markers. And so yes, we've done some tremendous work about that. We're going to have to change all our units, but because now we have these pure compounds that we can use as standards, and all the labs in the world can align their results now. So we worked with AWRI, and we were well aligned with, well correlated with their results. But for each compound, there was a multiplication factor to apply. And this won't happen anymore, because we can all use now the same yardstick. But all the work that we've done before is not lost, because we can figure out what these correction factors are, pre-standards and after standards, and then basically have a good database already available beginning of next year.
Great. Well, thanks for all the info. There was one question for the WineXRay guys, and I know Scott, you typed down an answer here, but if we could have just a quick discussion about this before we wrap up, I think that'd be nice. We had a question of, are we seeing changes in phenolic trends overall with climate change?
Well, that's $1 million question. We can tell you that if we showed you results from Bordeaux this year, you would say they looked like high-end power Cabernet from California or Washington. And the reality is that we see climate change affecting us more in the advancement of ripening, and we know that we can make very high quality in warm years. Actually, very, very high quality. In fact, the highest phenolic concentration we've seen years to date has been the 2013 harvest. And 2017, which was a hot year, was shaping up to be just like 13. And 20, and when Johnny showed you that data of having berry anthocyanins over 2,000 parts per million, that's huge. We're looking at maybe 70% of that in finished wine. But what's amazing, really, is what we're seeing in Bordeaux. And you take clean rootstocks, free of virus, with modern rootstock selections that we have now. With a warming climate, we see power like we have never, which you would not imagine seeing in Bordeaux. So if we told you that some of these lots appeared to be upwards of 1,500 parts of tannin, 2,300 parts of bound anthocyanin, it's just insanity. And so we can tell you for sure that Bordeaux is getting a lot more like the New World as opposed to the New World becoming stylistically like the Old World. Johnny, anything to add?
A couple of things, and one thing is that it's clear to me that the variability is coming in really strong and frequently. So I think that remote operations and real-time operations and real-time measurements tracking or properties tracking is going to be a necessity, if you will, to protect the value of what we're doing. Yeah, it's to me it's all around us, and it's local. Whether you're in just in Napa, or whether you're in Paso, whether you're in Washington, whether you're in Bordeaux, whether you're in Tuscany, it's all local. And essentially, you got to be able to react to making the right decisions so that you can not only save a lot of stuff, but also perhaps even improve the quality of the grapes and the quality of the wines that you're trying to make. So it's here, and then we can't just. I don't think we can continue doing what we're doing without the help of measuring exactly what's going on at the right point and the right time.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think what's to remember is when we talk about berry size, we're talking about berry size through the aeration process up to its peak and then its eventual decline. We're not talking about berry size at harvest, because that can be as much as 25 to 40% lower than it was at peak. Right. When we track our peak, and the easiest thing to do as a winemaker, it's so simple. Every time you take a berry sample, just count the number of berries in your baggie and weigh them, and come up with a berries or gram per berry measurement, and follow that umbrella through the course of ripening. And there's a very strong correlation that when you reach peak berry weight, you're also reaching peak anthocyanin accumulation and peak sugar per berry. After that, you're going to see a decline in all three: sugar per berry, color per berry, and of course weight. So when we look at our harvest, let's say we had a 0.65 gram berry, but if the peak was at 1.1, then we know we probably had a significant degradation just about all quality measurements. But we do see with 2000, any vintage that we have below a 1 gram per berry through the season all the way up to peak, we're looking at very high phenolic concentrations. 1 gram per berry is a great target for any winemaker, any grower. And when you have a vintage that normally tracks at 1 gram and you're at 0.885, then you know you're probably in for a very high phenolic yield.
Wow, powerful stuff. As
Easy
you like to say.
All you have to do is just count the berries and weigh the baggie.
Yeah. Great.
All right, thanks for having us.
So I'm going to go ahead there and wrap it up. Ashley, do you have any final thoughts here?
No final thoughts. Just want to thank everyone for attending. Thank our presenters and speakers, both for the technical information and the personal information about your experiences. So thank you so much. And again, we'll be distributing this content in a couple days.
Yeah, we'll also make our contact information available. So if you need to get a hold of us for any reason, just let us know.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.